Ladies and gentlemen, it is the 9th of April. It is early in the morning, and if the news is true, the Ultimate Warrior, Jim Hellwig, has passed away. Myself and my wife were massive fans of his during the late 1980s and the early 90s. So what I'd like to do, using WWE 2K14, is just put together a little tribute to him, go through a few of his classic matches, and talk about some of our favourite memories of him. So we're still at a very early stage here in this news. We don't. If you're watching this in a few days' time, or even a few hours' time, there may be more details. All we know at this moment, as of about 8 a.m. this morning UK time, is that he seems to have died, walking to a car with his wife. We don't know any more details like that than that. I'm sure more details will emerge in the coming hours. But rather than focusing on the fact that he has died, I would rather focus on what he kind of meant to us and why we enjoyed him in his prime. Of course, the timing seems quite incredible. What with him appearing on Raw just Monday night, very very late. In fact, I only watched that yesterday because I tend to watch them the day afterwards. And of course, WrestleMania Hall of Fame coming out on stage, and then the Hall of Fame ceremony the night before that. So it was almost the most famous week he has had since his being in his prime. So the timing is very odd, and his words were quite prophetic. When he was talking on Raw, he was talking about how someday hearts will stop beating, and someday people will kind of pass on, but the spirit of a warrior lives forever. I mean, whether there was any kind of foreknowledge in that, I don't know, or whether it was just a suitably normally cryptic promo by the Warrior. It's hard to tell, but certainly I think some of those words will become go some way to kind of towards his epitaph. Warrior was had an interesting kind of background, as we kind of see him here versus Ravishing Rick Rude at WrestleMania 5. He was one part of the Dingo Warriors with Sting over in various kind of territories, and both of them had face paint and continued to use face paint for much of their career, and they were famously not very good. The team was split up fairly quickly. I never watched this team. This was way before my time in watching wrestling. But they had a little run, but they split up. One went to WCW and never looked back, and the other one went WWF, as it was at that point, and never looked back. Let's not talk about how he kind of got to that muscly state, but he had one of the most incredible physiques around. This is often known as the kind of like the cartoon era in the WWF, when all of the characters were larger than life, all of the physiques were larger than perhaps possible, and Ultimate Warrior was at the head of that queue. He ran, he snarled, basically his offense consisted of whacking his opponent, picking them up, dropping them, and then falling on them. And this was not a man with a lot of finesse. However, the connection that he had with the crowd, the connection that he had with the kids, and the connection that he had to this day was quite incredible. He was memorable, and he was intense, and he was fast. And although in WrestleMania 5 he actually lost this match to Ravishing Rick Rude, it was one of those losses that was actually a promotion. He had outgrown the belt which he had, and it was time for him to move on to bigger and better things. But in those days, progression was slow. You didn't move up in a few months, you moved up in a year or a few years, and so this was just kind of rite of passage, and by losing here through a very screwy bit of Bobby Heenan interference, actually gave him a feud for the summer, and then built him up towards next year, where of course he faced Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. Now, many people would say that this was his finest match. I don't think I would disagree. It's certainly the most memorable one I think he had. It was intense all the way through. It was a good match all the way through. And looking back with my kind of kayfabe hat on, you look at them and kind of go, well, Hulk Hogan, great entertainer, not a great wrestler. Ultimate Warrior, great entertainer, not a great wrestler. Put them in the ring together, what are you going to get? But actually what they put together, with who knows whose help out the back, was incredible. From the test of strengths to the double clotheslines to the wonderful reversed finish, which actually at the time was quite kind of groundbreaking. We think quite a lot, the style of wrestling these days, it always tends to end with a finisher reversed into a finisher, into a finisher. It's fairly standard, but back in those days, that actually wasn't the way wrestling worked, and to have the kind of the leg drop of Hogan ducked out of the way of straight into the finish of the Ultimate Warrior was unusual and brilliant. It really was. And this was supposed to be the passing of the torch. Vince McMahon had chosen Ultimate Warrior to kind of be the new Hulk Hogan, and this was supposed to be the big match where the torch was passed from Hogan to Warrior. This, of course, was a face versus face match, which is very, very rare in itself. Normally it was always good guy versus bad guy, and if you look through WrestleMania 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it was always good team or good guy versus bad guy. So to have face versus face, good guy versus good guy was unusual, and rare, and I think it should remain rare, because they only work on certain occasions, and sometimes they don't work because crowds can kind of get confused. But in this particular case, what you had was loads of people that liked Hulk Hogan, loads of people that liked the Warrior, and so it was almost like the fans just kind of came together and chanted their own particular favourites, and it was a great match. And it started off Warrior's title reign, which was supposed to be the dawning of a new era in the WWF. Sadly, his title reign wasn't everything that people had hoped. He didn't do as well in the box office. Some people have said he wasn't given enough kind of good opposition, but he'd kind of joined up with the Road Warriors, the Legion of Doom, by the kind of the end of the year, and moving towards the Royal Rumble, the writing was on the wall, and he was screwed out of the title by Randy Savage and losing it to Sergeant Slaughter. So his title win was brilliant. His title reign, unfortunately, was not. But what was brilliant was WrestleMania 7, Randy Savage versus the Ultimate Warrior in a retirement match, which was one of the few that we'd actually had at that stage in WWF. This was back in the time when it was a big deal. You know, this wasn't the case of, oh, don't worry, he's retiring, he'll be back next week, or back in a years, or when you're coming back. You know, this was far more kind of believable and intense, that you wouldn't see one of these guys again. And of course, we did see Savage again after the loss, but actually it was a year or so later until he was actually back wrestling full time. And this was another great match, famous, I think, for the multiple finishes. There was a famous bit in the middle where Savage dropped elbow after elbow after elbow on the Warrior, and he kicked out, and then Warrior responded by hitting the gorilla press, and Savage kicked out, and then hitting his big kind of splash over and over and over again, and Savage couldn't take any more. Again, it was a really passionate, intense match, and I think that's kind of what Warrior was kind of really about in the ring. You know, he shook the ropes, he snorted, he hit his offense, he blew up really quickly. In wrestling terminology, that means that he got knackered. He was carrying so much muscle that he often used to kind of just go, kind of stand there, kind of knackered. But when he did come back with his offense, the crowd was behind him. He was also, unfortunately, very famous in wrestling circles for being thoroughly awkward behind the scenes. He was stubborn. He fought with Vince McMahon. I think he even tried to sue him at one point. By fight, I mean kind of like arguments and stuff. We don't know any kind of physical fights. But his relationship with Vince became strained, and he actually left. In a sense, they almost retired the wrong guy, because Warrior was gone very, very quickly with an injury. But he did come back at WrestleMania 8. He was the run-in in the Hulk Hogan Sid Justice match. But the comeback didn't really amount to anything. Again, there were political problems with Warrior behind the scenes, and it's interesting actually looking at Stephanie McMahon's comment today. She commented on his death and said that he's the strength of his character, which I don't. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I would say that she was admiring his kind of tenacity and stubbornness, but also kind of slightly there acknowledging his awkwardness, perhaps, because this was a guy that was very, very passionate in the ring and very, very passionate outside the ring. He has various websites over the last 10 years or so where he used to he called them Warrior Wisdom and things like that, and he would kind of rant about politics and the state of the world today and wrestling and anything really. And he was clearly a guy that believed in himself and his own words. Didn't always make sense, as what was seen by his promo on Monday and things like that, and even his Hall of Fame thing. He very much kind of believed his own shtick, even if other people didn't. But that was part of the character. He was in his own little world, and people I think will look back and remember that and smile at a guy that cut promos that didn't quite make any sense, but you shouted hurrah at the end anyway at this crazy madman who happened to be the World Wrestling Federation champion at the point when wrestling perhaps was at one of its peaks of popularity. But of course, the story didn't end at WrestleMania 8 for Warrior. He did go away again, but he also came back and famously squashed The Game, Triple H. It was one of the few times that Triple H has been properly squashed. I believe, if I'm remembering my history correctly, it was the same year as the infamous curtain call incident. Triple H was kind of in the midst of being punished for some kind of behind-the-scenes infractions, and part of this punishment was to be squished by the Warrior, and he was crushed. He hit him with a pedigree. The Warrior just sat right up and just dissolved him. And that was the end of it. But that again was a run with the WWF that lasted about as long as that. He was gone again very, very soon. He had a very short run in WCW where he faced Hulk Hogan again. Hulk Hogan wanted his win back, and it was all sorts of shenanigans involving a fireball and crook referees and all sorts of things. The One Warrior Nation and bits and bobs like that, which was an anagram like an anagram of NWO. It wasn't a great end to the career, but for me, what he is famous for, what he'll be remembered for, is the passionate wrestling, the running madman who shook the ropes and ran to the ring and just picked people up and slammed them on their face in a big gorilla press. My wife, also a fan when she was a kid, and her brother was a kid. She was always the ultimate winner, and it's part of her kind of childhood as well. He was a cartoon character come to life. He was one of those superheroes that you see on the cartoons, except he was real, with the face paint and the tassels and the big hair, and a true product of the 1980s, and I will have good memories of him, and I hope you do too. So this is it. This is my little recap of his career and my little tribute to what he kind of meant to us. If you want to put any comments of your own in the section below about what you kind of remember about him, he certainly had a very mixed career, but whatever he was memorable. He was intense. He was the Ultimate Warrior.